Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Kuf Yud Aleph. We are almost at the very end of our Masechet. We're actually going to start the last Mishnah today and finish the last Mishnah today. Details for this week. So today is Monday. We have class tomorrow. We'll do Kuf Yud Bet. Wednesday morning there will be no class, as we usually do with Siyums. We're going to learn the last daf at the Siyum on Wednesday night or Wednesday day, whatever time it is by you. And we hope to see you all there. I'll be teaching the last daf. Dr. Ayel Lipson is going to be teaching also a shiur about Ma'arichet HaMishpatit, the legal system as appropriate for our Masechet. And we will also be, we also have a community speaker, Fally Klein, and in addition, last minute, we also have a woman finishing Shas, Bracha Rutner. So she's going to be finishing Shas with us, which is great. We're very excited to have her, and she'll be speaking short also at the end of the Siyum. So looking forward to seeing you all there. We are going to get started. Today's daf is sponsored by Ricky and Alan Zibid in loving memory of their mothers, Helen Zibid, Hannah Bat Yaakov, Rachel Leah, whose 20th year site was the 28th of Adar, and Friedel Bat Meir Verifka, whose 10th year site is the 9th of Nisan. These were true women of valor who lived lives of chesed, lashon tov, and hava Israel. We miss them every day. May their neshamot have the highest aliyah. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. 3 psukim we're going to quote now, where Yochanan and Reish Lakish have a debate, each one kind of sticking with their guns about their approach to it. Sometimes different approaches by different rabbis is also affected by, it's like a general outlook they have. It certainly seems so from the 3 here that Reish Lakish has one particular outlook and Rabbi Yochanan has a different outlook. So we're going to start with Sheol. Okay, we were talking about Korach and swallowed up into the ground, and Sheol is really the depths, is Gehenom. Talk about those who go to Gehenom, how many people go there, on what basis we go there. So Lachein herchiva Sheol nafsha para pia livli chok. Okay, so the Sheol is widens, opens up, and swallows up everyone who is without chok, without law. So Amar Reish Lakish, who's going to be swallowed up by Gehenom? Anyone who even leaves over one law. Okay, what does it mean? Libli chok, those who don't have law. Those who are missing even one law. Okay, so Amar Reish Lakish, it's really not appropriate. You say that about God, that God's going to swallow up in Gehenom anyone who has one law they don't follow. I mean, let's be real, right? Lots of people don't follow at least one law. But God is going to actually save you from Gehenom, even if all you learned was one law. Okay, it's the opposite, according to Rabbi Yochanan. And the same is going to be true with the next 3 psukim. Now we're talking about the future, the destruction that's going to come before the coming of the Mashiach. So in all the land, God says, 2 times will be destroyed and wiped out, Bashlishit, and the 3rd will remain there. So what does this mean, the 3rd? Amarish, like a 3rd of the people will remain. A 3rd of who? Well, Amarish Lakish, the Shishal Shem. The 3rd son of Shem, Arpashchad, which we are descended from, only a 3rd of them will remain alive, which means a lot of the Jews are going to be wiped out. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, lo nichal amarayu, damar lo hachi. It's not appropriate that you say that about God. Ela filu shlishi shel Noach. It's talking about a 3rd of the 3rd of Noach. In other words, it's going to be much less affecting particularly the Jewish people. It's going to be, what he's talking about is a 3rd of the descendants of Noach, which doesn't mean a 3rd of the Jewish people or a lot of the Jewish people will be destroyed. Even though we are descended from Noach, but when you go up a generation and then say a 3rd, it's going to be a lot less. That we're a much smaller percentage of that. Ki anochi, 3rd pasuk. Ki anochi ba'alti b'chem v'lakachti etchem echad me'ir u'shnayim mimishpacha. Now this is God saying, I am going to save you. This is the future redemption. What is God going to do? He's going to take 1 from a city and 2 from a family. Now, Amar Reish Lakish, the Reish Lakish says, this is very clear what it says in the pasuk. God's going to save. Who's going to be saved in the future redemption? 1 person from each city, 2 people from each family. Okay, exactly how that works, I don't know, but it's certainly not a lot of people. Right? Is it not appropriate that you're saying that about God? That's all God's going to save? If there's one good person in the city, it sounds like the whole, stone conversation of Abraham about stone, and maybe you can save them because of this amount of tzaddikim, etc., one person in the city can save an entire city. And shnayim mishpacha mezakim kol mishpacha kula. If there's two good people in a family, they can save the entire family. And there you have the three psukim, the Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, deliberating about how to understand them. Reish Lakish was a much harsher outlook, and Rabbi Yochanan with a much more open outlook. Yativ Rav Kahana, now we're going to see that Rav Kahana and Rav had the same debates. Yativ Rav Kahana kamei to Rav. So Rav Kahana was sitting in front of Rav. But Yativ Ka'amar Dvarim Kiftavam, and he was reading this last pasuk, and he said, see, it's exactly as it says, just like Reish Lakish said. Amar le Rav, lo nichalen marayu damalu hachi, right? It's not appropriate that you speak this way. Then again, are you expecting, you're saying of God that God speaks this way? There's no way God would speak that way. Exactly as we saw before, that he understands it like Rabbi Yochanan. This is a much more open approach. Okay. Now, we have another thing that Rav kind of reprimands Rav Kahana about. So this is a bit of a strange story. Rav sees that Rav Kahana was washing his hair instead of being in the Beit Midrash. Okay, I guess it was not the time to be washing your hair. And kind of, it sounds like he was a little bit, taking care of himself, putting a little too much time into beautifying himself. So Amar Le, Rav says to him, like when he comes up in the Beit Midrash, right, then Sadak Yatzv Kamei to Rav, then after that he went to the Beit Midrash, and Rav says to him, V'lo timatzei be'eretz hachayim, you will not be among those getting life, meaning in the world to come. You lost your share in the world to come. Sounds pretty harsh, which is interesting because Rav was the one who wasn't harsh in his explanation before, but now it becomes very harsh. It comes to criticizing Rav Kahana for not being in the Beit Midrash and instead dealing with his hair and fixing himself up. Amar le. So Rav Kahana responds, Mela kalayitatit le. Are you cursing me? Amar le. He says, no, I'm not cursing you. Kra ka'amina. I'm just saying a pasuk. Okay? In other words, I'm saying what the Torah says, which is lo timatzei Torah b'misha mechayeh atzmo aleha. Okay? In other words, the Torah is not going to be found for people who beautify themselves to learn Torah and do it in a way. Some of the commentaries say that they like make it easy for themselves. No, Torah is acquired by hard work and not by, sitting around and lounging about and all that. Okay, so that's just another conversation between them, not really so connected with what we were talking about. Okay. Tanya, Rabbi Simai Omer. Now we get to really nice. We get to two Pesach sugyot. Okay, although I wouldn't say they're nice sugyot, they're complicated sugyot, and they're going to put Moshe in a pretty bad light. So Tanya, Rabbi Simai Omer. Remember the four lashonot of Geulah. Really, there's five, right? And then there's Veheveti, right? The four kosot are against the four lashonot, and here's the fifth one, Veheveti. So now they're taking number 4 and number 5. It says, okay, I took you to be my nation, and I brought you into the land of Israel. What do you learn from here? We're going to make a heikesh. What's true for one is true for the other. This is when two psukim are near each other, or two words are near each other in a pasuk. We can say what's true for one is true for the other. So, what do we say? Well, the getting out of Egypt was like the going into Israel. How so? Ma biatan la'aretz, just like when they got into the land. Shnayim mishishim ribo. Now, how many people went into the land that came out of Egypt? The ones that came out of Egypt all died in the desert, other than 2 people, Yoshua and Caleb. So, 2 out of 600,000 got into the land from those who came out of Egypt. Well, af yitziatam mitzrayim, shnayim mishishim ribo. 2 out of every 600,000 people that were in Egypt previously, it's not clear, it's not who came into Egypt, right? They were obviously dead by then, or most likely, right? We did talk about some people that seem to have extended life very long, but we're not talking about that right now. 2 out of every 600,000 people, that percentage, which is a teeny weeny percentage, that were in Egypt got out of Egypt. And most of them died. Some of the commentators say they died in Makat Choshech, and that's why it was dark, so that, right, the Egyptians wouldn't see. Right, this comes exactly. There's all sorts of midrashim about this that come from different places. Chamushim alu, there may be 1 in 5, 1 in 50. Some people say 1 in 500. What is the chamushim? It comes from chamesh. Okay, there's all these midrashim. This is a really extreme one, because this, if you do the math, it's 180 billion people were there and only 600,000 got out. Okay, because when that's in the end, we know 600,000 got out. We're going to say that was a 2 out of 600,000 people that got out. Okay, that's a crazy number. Obviously, there's one of these exaggerated Gemaras. And the question is, what kind of point are they trying to make with it? It's a good question, right? Why are they trying to say that so few actually got out? It's similar to what, it's very similar, and I assume this is why it's here, to the one person in a city and two from a family that we just were dealing with about how many people are going to be saved in the future redemption. And in fact, we're going to say that right now. Because I'm a Rabbi, Mashiach. The same thing's going to be in the time of the Mashiach. Rabbi says, Shne'emal, we're going to do another heikesh or comparison. V'anta shama kiyimei ne'ureha. You will be answered there like the days of your youth. Ukiyom alotame eretz Mitzrayim, and like the day you got out of Egypt. So basically, it's going to go like this: when they got into the land, only 2 and 600,000 went into the land. That's just like now we're going to learn from there to Yetziat Mitzrayim, and from Yetziat Mitzrayim, we're going to learn to the future redemption and what a small percentage of people are going to be saved. Tanya, another story having to do with Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay, this one is really just Yetziat Mitzrayim. Didn't have to do with Moshe. The next two are going to have to deal with Moshe. Tanya Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi. Pam achat nichnati laAlexandria shel Mitzrayim. One time I got to Alexandria, city in Egypt, very famous city. Matzati zaken echad. So I saw an elderly man. Amar li bo ve'erecha ma asu avotai lavotecha. So finds this Egyptian man, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, and the Egyptian man tells him, I'm going to tell you what our forefathers did to your forefathers in Egypt. Mehem tavu bayam, they drowned some of you in the water. Mehem hargu b'charav, they killed some of you by the sword. Mehem achu b'binyan, they crushed some of you into the building. Right? These are midrashim that they talk about happened in Egypt. V'al davar zen ne'enash Moshe Rabbeinu. And on this issue, Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. Okay, now we're going to see on what count was Moshe Rabbeinu punished. Shne'emal, ume'az bati el paro l'daber b'shmecha hara'a. L'daber b'shmecha hera la'am hazeh. So what happens, if you remember the story, right? The Jews are suffering in Egypt. God tells Moshe to go talk to Paro, and then Paro makes it worse for the Jews. And basically what they're saying is these things that this person, this Egyptian man was telling him, he said, and this is what Moshe complained about in the Pasuk, when Moshe goes back to God and says, I don't understand. From the time I went to talk to Paro, you made it worse for them, right? The whole idea was you were supposed to help them. That's a complaint against God, right? So you made it Herala Amazeh, right? After I came to talk to you, you made it much worse for them. After I came to talk to Paro, in your name, you made it much worse for the Jewish people. Amarlo Kadosh Baruch Hu, what's the Kadosh Baruch Hu's response to this? Chaval al da'avdim v'lo mishtachchin. Right? Woe is to, like, too bad we don't have these people anymore that used to live. In other words, I want the good times when I had Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They were much better. Okay, now, let's see. Hare kam pamim nigleti al Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov be'el Shaddai v'lo hiru midotai v'lo amru li ma shmecha. Okay, there were times when I revealed myself to Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and they never asked me, what's your name? Right, now we're going back to earlier. When Moshe says to God, well, tell me your name, right? Again, that was audacious of him to do that. It wasn't really appropriate. So now we're going to say, Amarti, now we're going to show. So number one, never ask God, what is your name? Okay, that was number one, how the forefathers were greater than Moshe. And, really it's a critique on Moshe. It's not just they were better than Moshe, but it wasn't appropriate what Moshe did. Second thing, Amarti l'Avraham, kumet alech ba'aretz la'orcha l'rachba. Go walk around the land, right, lengthwise, widthwise, ki lecha t'nena, because the land will be yours. However, bikesh makom likbor et tzara v'lo matzah. Even though God said the whole land is going to be yours, when it came time to bury Sarah, he couldn't find a place to bury her, and he had to, in the end, spend a lot of money to buy a burial plot. Even though God promised him the whole land, he could have complained, said, "You promised me the whole land. What's going on? Why do I have to buy land here?" Avram didn't complain at all. Amarti liYitzchak, Gor ba'aretz hazot, v'yeimach v'avarecha, live in this land, and I'll be with you, and I will bless you. Bikshu avadav mayim l'shov v'lo matzu. But his servants looked for water. They couldn't find to drink. Couldn't find until they got into a whole fight. How do we know? Shneimar v'yarivu ro'ei gra ro'ei Yitzchak lemor lanu amayim. Right, the ro'ei gra were fighting with the ro'ei Yitzchak. The shepherds of Gra and the shepherds of Yitzchak were fighting to say the water's ours. V'lo yirachar midotai. And Yitzchak didn't come and complain. You promised me I would be blessed and I have no water. No complaints. Amarti liYaakov, ha'aretz asher ata shochev aleha, lecha tnena, the land we are sleeping on will be yours. Bikesh makom lintoa oalo v'lo matzah. But then, this is right before the Shechem story, when he gets to Shechem, he can't find a place before the Dinah and Shechem story. He gets there, he can't find a place. V'lo matzah shekana b'mea kasita. He had to buy a piece of land there to live there by Shechem for 100 kasita. That was a lot of money. So again, v'lo hirera chamid didn't complain. V'lo amruli mashmecha, and nobody said, what's your name? V'atan, you, Moshe, amartali mashmecha b'tchila. In the beginning, you said, what's your name? And then, achshav ata omerli, v'atzelu itzalta et amecha, and then now you're saying, and I didn't save your nation. Ata tir'eh asher aseh paro. And then comes the pasuk, you will see, right now you will see what I will do to Paro. Now, what's the drasha on this pasuk? What is Moshe going to see? Only what I did to Paro. And basically what this is saying is, we all think that Moshe was punished because he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and that's why he doesn't come into the land of Israel. I mean, not just we all think it says so in the Torah. But what this midrash is saying is, it actually went all the way back to the very beginning. And Moshe was punished from the beginning, from this line where he said, why'd you make it worse, right? And for coming to complain to God. Because of that, Moshe was told, you will see what I do to Paro, but you're not going to get into the land of Israel, and you're not going to see that war, but you're not going to get to be in Israel. Okay, so it's interesting. It's basically saying, right, maybe it's also saying it's the same characteristic trait that kind of appeared later, right? But we always say people don't change, and that, what you have then going to continue, just come out in different forms. And maybe there's some connection there of the same midah that caused Moshe to say this to God now, that also caused Moshe to hit the rock later. Requires more thought, but it's very interesting. Next. Okay, now we're fast forward. Moshe then, in the middle of this, the situation there, it says he hurried, which is a little bit strange. Moshe hurried and bowed down. Okay, and he bows down to God. Mara Moshe, what did he see that all of a sudden made him bow? So we have a machloket. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamla Amar erech hapayim ra'ah. He saw that God was slow to get angry. Okay, he saw this purported midah of God and was amazed, kind of awed by it, bowed down. Rabbanan Amre emet ra'ah. The rabbis say he saw truth, meaning he was worried about the truth of God. He knows that God is true and was worried that God was going to punish everybody and kill everybody. And his response was, I have to bow down and pray. So it's a very different response if it's either, seeing God as erech hapayim or seeing God as all truth. So now we're going to bring a braita that says, Tanya Kamanda Amar erech hapayim ra. He saw God was slow to anger. Here we're going to have another conversation between God and Moshe, and again, not showing necessarily the best trait of Moshe and God getting upset with Moshe. Titania, it says in a Braita, Shala Moshe l'marom, it's all the Kadosh Baruch Hu yoshev v'chotev erech hapayim. When Moshe got up to Har Sinai, he sees God that's writing the words erech hapayim. Amar lefanav, Ribbono Shalom, erech hapayim l'tzadikim. Because I assume you mean your erech hapayim for good people. You're not going to be slow to anger when people are bad. Amarlo, af l'rashaim. God says, no. Also to bad people. All right. I have the midah of rachamim, even on bad people. Moshe didn't really like that. Amarlo, Rishaim Yovedu. What do you mean? Rishaim should be wiped out, right? They're bad people. They should be destroyed. Amarle, Hashtachazi Mai Debayla. God says, I'll show you. Okay? Now, what is I'll show you? Well, let's see. Kishachatu Yisrael Amarlo. So when the people sinned, we're going to now quote a pasuk from the Gehenom Meraglim. He said to him, Lo kach hamarta li erech hapayim l'tzadikim. So now Moshe says, God says to Moshe, says, I'll show you, right? So what does he do? The people sin. The truth is, it's unclear here whether we're talking about Gehenom Meraglim or Cheda Egel, but, and we're going to, it seems like they're talking about Cheda Egel, but we're going to end up quoting a pasuk from Gehenom Meraglim, the sin of the spies. But anyway, God says to Moshe, oh, well, I'm erech hapayim l'tzadikim. Remember, isn't that what you told me? That I should only be slow to anger for the righteous people? Turning out I'm a bet. Amar lefanav. So Moshe says to him, what do you mean? Ribono Shalom, v'lo kach amarta li? Didn't you say to me, af l'rishaim? And that's where it says, and now they're quoting from Gehenom Meraglim, that explains this pasuk, v'hainu dichtiv, ata yigdalna koach Adonai ka'asher dibarta lemol. Basically, Moshe says to God, you should be, make yourself great, or your strength should be great, like you said. In other words, Moshe is saying, don't quote me. I'm quoting back what you said, which is that you said that you were erech apayim even to Rishaim, and you shouldn't wipe everybody out. So even it kind of shows Moshe in a bad light, and the Moshe says, I'll show you, but in the end, God does end up going with Moshe and obviously not destroying all the Jewish people. And, just one second. So in both these stories, you have Moshe kind of attacking God in a way and saying, I don't understand your ways and how are you working? But in the end, right? So the first one, Moshe really gets punished for it. And this one, you don't see Moshe really getting punished. Okay. Rabbi Chaga have a salik va'aza b'darga. Okay, apropos this idea of God being erech hapayim, we're going to have another story here. Rabbi Chaga have a salik va'aza b'darga debei Rabbi Barshila. He was going up the stairs to get to the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Barshila, and when he goes up the stairs, this always happens where people hear children reading psukim, and then they all of a sudden have an epiphany. Something becomes very clear to them when they hear the students reciting psukim. This happens in a lot of stories where all of a sudden they happen to be there and the kid happened to recite this pasuk because the kids used to memorize psukim and they would just recite them. And it happened to be exactly that moment. This was the pasuk they were quoting. This story is a little less strong in terms of that, but he does have this little bit of an epiphany there. So while he's going up the stairs, Shamalahu Yanuka Da'amal, he hears the student reading this pasuk from Tehillim. We say it in our davening Friday night and on Shabbat morning also. Hashem Malaki Lavesh. It says, Edotecha ne'emnu ma'od leveitcha nava kodesh Hashem la'orech yamin. Okay, your statutes or your edut are very trustworthy. Leveitcha nava kodesh, in your house it will be a beautiful place to kind of, your sanctity will be there, be this place where your sanctity lives. Hashem la'orech yamin. Okay, now orech yamin means God will last forever, maybe will have long life. It's unclear exactly what this means, but what they explained it to mean is God is slow to anger. Okay, even though it's not exactly the words, it's a little bit tricky, but that's what they say. V'samichle, now, it's not exactly samichle. Okay, now what it means, samichle, maybe the child was reciting that parak of Tehillim, which is Tzadi Gimel, and then he read Tzadi, okay, which is Tefillah Moshe. That's one way to read it. Or just that the student would happen to say it, and now Tehillim Tzadi until Kuf doesn't have an intro sentence other than Tefillah Moshe. Usually there's like some intro sentence, Lamanatzeach Mizmor, David Mizmor, things like that. These don't have anything. So they attribute, because the first one says Tefillah Moshe, that all the subsequent Tehillim there, till Kuf, are also attributed to Moshe. If you attribute this to Moshe, then what do you see here? Back to our idea. That Moshe is the one that when Moshe bowed down, it was because he was amazed that God had erech hapayim, and that's what it was. Because if Moshe is the one saying Hashem la'orech yamim, then right, so b'samachle tefillah Moshe amar shma mina erech hapayim ra'a. It must be the reason why Moshe bowed was because he saw that God was erech hapayim, and he understood this attribute of God of being erech hapayim, of slow to anger. Okay, so that was that section where we had this debate. Why did Moshe bow? Right, we got there because we were talking about Moshe kind of complaining to God, and this was the context of a complaint to God. But in the end, Moshe recognizes that God is erech hapayim, slow to anger. And again, this was all to support the one opinion that what Moshe bowed down for was because he saw that God was slow to anger, as opposed to the other opinion, which said Moshe was worried about God being truth and went and bowed down to pray to save the Jewish people, that they wouldn't all be wiped out. Okay, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Back to tzaddikim and what's going to be with tzaddikim in the world to come. A big theme of our chapter. Atira kadosh baruch hu liot atara b'rosh kol tzaddik v'tzaddik. Okay, what exactly this means? It's a good question, but God is going to be a crown head of every tzaddik v'tzaddik. It's like everyone will kind of reflect God. Will be a representative of God because God will be on their heads. Shneimar b'yom hahu yeh Hashem tzvaot la'ater tzvi u'litzvirat tifara l'sh'ar amo. So on that day, God will be this ateret tzvi, which is kind of again, atara from the crown, and tzvirat tifara, like a glory on Shar Amo, on the rest of his nations. Now, what does it mean, the rest of his nation? How do we know this means tzaddik? So they say, first of all, Ma'ila Ateret Tzvi v'Litzvirat Tifara, Le'osim Ritzono U'Mitzapim Liyeshuato. Okay, they say these are people who do the will of God and are waiting for God to redeem them. Okay, again, expressing the importance of this idea that we're supposed to be waiting for the Geulah. Yachol Lakol, you might have thought this is it for everybody. Talmud Lomar, Lish'al Amo. It's really just for the people, the remainder of the nation. Now, what does it mean, the remainder of the nation? Lemisha mesim atzmo keshirayim. It's someone who makes themselves into a remainder. And what does that mean? What does it mean to make yourself a remainder? Well, it means you don't think too highly of yourself, as opposed to all the arrogance that we talked about, right? How arrogance brings people downfall. And therefore, it's for those people who are the righteous people. Those are the tzaddikim. Tzaddikim are people who are humble. And that's really what it means. Sha'ar Amo is those left over, those who look at themselves as if they're left over. And that's how, those are the people that can have the crown of God on their heads. Now the next pasuk says, okay, we're going to see 3 pasukim here. The second pasuk continues this idea of people who the crown of God will be upon them. Uleruach mishpat, liyoshev al mishpat, ligvura uligvura, mishivei melchama sha'ara. Okay, what do all these things mean? Liruach mishpat zeh harodet yitzro. This is someone who can rule against his evil inclination or her evil inclination. Liyoshev al mishpat zeh hadan dinem et lamitot. This is someone who does a truthful judgment. Okay, they judge in a truthful manner. Ligvura zeh hamitgaber b'yitzro. This is someone who overcomes his yetzer. Okay, one is rules the evil inclination, the other is overcomes it. Mishivei Melchama, Torah, who are those who return war. Return war is someone who can fight the fight of Torah, meaning they can sit in the Beit Midrash and have a good argument with someone. And Sha'ara, Elu Shemashkevin Umarivin B'Batei Knesiyot B'Batei Midrashot. Okay, to go to the gates, what are the gates if not the Batei Midrash? The Batei Knesset, the shuls, and the learning places. So these are people who frequent those places. All those people will get rewarded. However, the next pasuk is Amrami Datadin Lefnei Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Before we read that pasuk, you're going to see the third pasuk here. By the way, we're in Yeshayahu chapter 28, okay, verses 6, right, 5, 6, and 7. The next pasuk is, let me read you the pasuk first. Gam ela b'yayin shagu b'shechar ta'u kohen v'navi shagu b'shechar nivleu min yayin ta'u min hashechar shagu b'rosh as shagu b'ro'eha paku pliliya. Okay, without explaining all the words, this basically sounds like these people, right? Also, these people like got drunk with wine and basically sounds like they kind of went off the path and they're going to get into trouble. They're going to be punished. So we were talking about all these great people. So how do we have the switch? And the Gemara asks basically, Manishtanu. So the Midat Adin goes before God and says, Ribbono Shel Olam, Manishtanu Elu Me'elu. Why are these different from those? These are going to get punished and those aren't, right? Those are going to get your crown and those are going to get punished. Amar la v'gam elu b'yayin shagur b'shechar ta'u paku pliliya. Ve'ein pukai la Gehenom. So he says what's going to happen to them is they're going to end up in Gehenom. Shneimar lo tiezot lacha lepuka. This shouldn't be for you for Gehenom. Ve'ein plila ela dayanim. Shneimar b'natam plilim. That's pasuk in the Torah where they get judgment put upon them. It's the guy who kills in the middle, there's that woman who's pregnant and the baby gets killed. But there it's Natam plilim, the judge decides, it's going to put upon him a fine. So what we have here is those people are going to be judged to hell. Now, it's very unclear who these people are, but what the commentaries seem to say, which is, again, hard to understand, there's tzaddikim who have all these good qualities. And then there's tzaddikim, and what makes them a tzaddik is a good question, who don't have those qualities that we mentioned above. And those people are going to end up in Gehenom, which seems like a tzaddik who doesn't necessarily have all those qualities. You wouldn't expect them, maybe to get punished, but not necessarily end up in Gehenom. So it's hard to exactly understand this section and what exactly, it's not really clear from the text who these people are and what they've done. They're deserving of that, but they seem to be distinguishing between 2 types of righteous people. And I guess the second group isn't really righteous, even though they kind of, again, it doesn't say here they're righteous, but the commentaries seem to say there's righteous people who are like that, and then there's righteous people like that, and those end up with the crown of God, and the others end up with in Gehenom. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. Anshe Ir Hanidachat, people in the city. Remember Ir Hanidachat? We're actually going to end this chapter, interestingly enough, with more of a halachic type thing, because we're going to start talking about, the Mishnah is going to go into all sorts of halachic details. And in fact, atypical for the Mishnah is going to derive all these different halachot from psukim. We have a pretty long Mishnah here, which is going to take us close to the end of the daf of the Anshe Ir Hanidachat. And also a little different from before. Before we were talking about people who lived, who either got a portion of the world to come or didn't. Like, we started with the three kings and the four Hedyotot, and then we went to the Dor Haflaga and the Dor Mabul and the Stom and Korach and all that. Now we're moving into people who sin in a particular way, like in the future, which is Anshe Ir Hanidachat. And in fact, we learned that Ir Hanidachat really lo hayav lo nivra, which you can understand this after reading this section. It's kind of impossible to have a situation where we have an Ir Hanidachat. It's a city where or we're going to see in a minute, the majority of the inhabitants worship idols. And we'll get a review of some of the things we already learned about Ir Hanidachat, because we talked about them and the people who get, if you remember, their punishment, they get killed by Saif, by the sword. So they were in the list of people, Elu Hena Ne'aragin. Okay, so if you have a city that all worships idols, they're not going to have a portion of the world to come. Shenema, Yatsu Anashim B'nei Bilyam Mikrbecha, V'yadichu et Yoshvei Iram. Okay, so the people are going to leave the city, right? These two people come from within the city, and they convince the people to worship idols. And then one second. Right. So they say, Yatsu Anashim B'nei Bilyam Mikrbecha, they're going to leave from within you, meaning they won't have a place in the midst of the Jewish people. That's the way they darshan it. So now these people basically end up convincing the rest of the city to worship idols. And now we're going to learn some other things about it. Einam neharagim ad shiu medicheha me'ota ha'ir ume'oto hashevet. They don't get killed unless the people who sway the people to worship idols will have to be from the same city and the same tribe. We're going to end our daf with this idea also, but get back there. V'ad shiudach ruba has to be the majority of the city. V'ad shidichua anashim, it has to be men who do this. Hidichua anashim uktanim, if women and children subverted everyone to worship idols. O shiudach miuta, or only some of the city was swayed to worship idols. O shayu medicha chutzala, or the people were from outside, from a different city, who convinced everybody. Hare elu ki yechidim. Then we just rule everybody in the city, even if it ends up being the majority of the city. We're going to, all those people. Now, what's the punishment for an individual who worships idols? If you remember, they get stoned. So all the people will get stoned instead of the sword. Now, remember, killing by the sword is a lesser punishment. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Utzrichim, another criteria. Again, this is going to make it pretty impossible. You need two witnesses and a warning for every single person in that town who worshipped idols. Two people saw them worshiping idols, and two people warned them before they worshipped. And do you know that if you do this, you're going to get killed? There's a chumrah about individuals as opposed to the whole city. Because again, that's what I said before. Individual who worships idols will get stoned. Lefichach, but since we're strict with that, lefichach mamonam palat. But then we don't destroy their property. Hamirubim b'sayif. But if the whole city does it, or the majority of the city does it, then they all get killed by the sword. Lefichach mamonam avad, and that's why we destroy their property. We're lenient in one area, but we're strict in another. The Mishnah continues darshan the psukim. You're gonna kill all the people in that city. What do we learn? Lefi charev. Take is usually to kill with a sword, so that's how we learn that you get killed by the sword. Hachameret v'agamelet haoveret mimakom lemakom hare'elu mitzilin ota. Okay, now if you have somebody passing through the city, like a donkey rider or a camel rider, who's going from place to place, because it says those inhabitants of the city, those living in the city, those people are temporarily living in the city, so they get counted in the count in the sense that they could save the people of the city. Because let's say there's 51% of the people that are worshiping idols, but if you add those people to the count and they're not worshiping idols, will sway, right? It'll sway the percentages, and you'll end up with 49%. Well, then the city's saved. We're skipping the word Shenamar. It shouldn't be here because this is the next section. Right? Shenamar would be saying as it says, but that's not, okay? Now, hacharem otav et kol asher ba be'epem talafi charev. Okay, what completely destroy everything in the city, everything that's there, and all the animals by the sword. Mikan amru, right, the animals get killed by the sword, everything else gets burned. Mikan amru, from here they learn, and it's not clear how they learn it from here. The Gemara will get to it later. Nichsei tzadikim sebetocha ovdin, shebechutz ala pletin. B'shavasha'im, ben shebetocha, ben shebechutz ala harei elu ovdin. They learn from this pasuk, again, it's not clear yet how, they're going to distinguish between the property of tzaddikim and the property of rishaim in the city. So the property of tzaddikim, whatever's in the city will be burnt, whatever's outside the city will not. But rishaim, if they have property outside the city, they're going to destroy that as well. Again, we're skipping the word shenemal. Ve'et kol shlala tikbotz al toch rechova. We gather everything in the city, all the property, into the square of the town. Now, what if there's no square in the town? Im ein la rechov, osim la rechov. Rechov here doesn't mean street, it means a square. If there's no square, they make one. Hayta rechov achutz alaf. It had a square, but it was outside the walls of the city. Konsino taletocha. Okay, not so easy to do, but they remove the walls and they make sure the square is within the city walls, and then they burn everything there. So now you have to burn the city, burn everything in it. Kalil completely Lashem Elokecha. Why say the word Kalil? First of all, the word Kalil appears a lot in we're starting Vayikra now, in the sacrifices. So now they say, this must connect to sacrifices. How so? So first they say Shlala. I skipped. 1 second. Did I skip somewhere? Sorry, I skipped. Okay. I was jumping the gun on the Kalil. First, we're going to darshan some other things in this pasuk. So all the shalal, and then it says Kalil. So what is shlala? Shlala means the shalal of the city, right? It belongs to someone. So now they're saying shalal v'lo shalal shamayim, not things that belong to God. So what belongs to God? Well, mikanabru ha'kedeshot sheba yipadu. If there's something sanctified there, we redeem it. We don't burn it. Trumot, yeah, right. We have to redeem it. Then you can burn it because it's no longer sanctified. Trumot yerakvu. Anything that's truma there, you have to leave to rot. Maaser sheni v'kitvei kodesh yiganezu. Okay, if there's maaser sheni and kitvei kodesh, you have to bury them. And we'll get to all this in the Gemara later. Kalil Hashem Elokecha, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Im atem osim din. Rabbi Shimon says that God said, Im atem osim din be'ir nidacha, ma'aleh ani alehem ki ilu atem ma'alim ola kalil lefanai. If you do judgment with an ir nidacha, which again we said never really happened, but if you were to do it, it's like you're offering a sacrifice to God, because you're basically wiping out avodah zarah, and that's like worshiping God. Vaitat tel olam. Okay, it's supposed to be a tail, right? That's like an empty mound forever. So what did we learn from this? We're going to have a machloket. Lo teaseh ganot upardesim. You can't even, it's a tail forever. You can't even grow there orchards and gardens. That's the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Kiva Omer, no, it says, Vaitat tel olam, but the end of that episode is lo tibaneh od. It can never be rebuilt. Now, building is more city, like a place to live. You can't build it to the way it was before. You can make it things where you grow produce. Okay, it's not the same thing. In the Mishnah. Okay, now it says, and you shouldn't have anything to do with the cherem, right? You shouldn't touch at all anything in the city. But what they're really quoting is the end of that pasuk, or the second part of that pasuk. Leman yeshuv Hashem echarona po. This is all to return the anger of God, right? So the God anger will calm down. If there's wicked people in the world, there's anger in the world. When we get rid of the Rishaim, God's anger subsides. Okay, the Braita is going to start off with the Gemara is going to start off with the Braita. Tanu Rabbanan Yatzu Hein Velo Shluchan. Another halacha. Two people came out from the city, not messengers of theirs. Okay, what does it mean, messengers? Why a messenger is any different? As we always say, which means the messenger is basically subverting everyone to go worship idols. So what's the difference? The messenger basically becomes the person doing it. So there's a big debate among the commentators what it means a messenger. Either it means the messengers came from a different city, but then you wouldn't even need because, right? So you might say, well, they were sent by people in the city, so maybe that's considered in the city. Some people say that we're talking about if people come and say, listen, so-and-so and so-and-so told me to tell you should worship idols, that's not your nidacha. To be your nidacha, you have to say, we think you should worship idols. and not in the language of someone else told us. So it's a little bit of debate what the case of shluchan is here. Anashim, anashim pachot mishnayim. So first of all, it says anashim, people in plural. So it has to be two people. If it's one person convinces a city, that's not yorani dachat. It has to be two. Davar acher, a different interpretation. We could already have guessed this. Anashim velo nashim. Anashim velo ktanim. We already saw in the Mishnah. Women know. Children know. Because anashim always means man, or usually means, unless we want to darshan it otherwise, man, not woman, man, and not child. B'nei bilya'al, banim sheperku ol mitzaverhem. They darshan the word bilya'al like bili ol, without the ol. It has to be people who basically threw off the yoke of God. They don't believe in God. Mikir b'chat has to be from within you. V'lo min asfar, not people living on the border. Usually that means on a border between Gentiles and Jews. If it's someone like that, that doesn't count. Yoshvei Iram, v'lo yoshvei ir acheret. They have to be members of their city and not of a different city. Lemor, shetzruchim edim ba'atra'ah l'chol echad ve'echad. Is kind of taking this word out of context, but it says to say, so they learn from here that there has to be some sort of saying, meaning someone has to warn them. Okay, there have to be warnings for everybody. Itmar. Now we get to a totally different machlokes having nothing to do with our topic, but you'll see that the first question Rabbi Yochanan raises against Reish Lakish's interpretation is from our Mishnah, and that's why this is here. And with this will end today. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Cholkim Ir Echad L'Shnei Shvatim. We divide one city. One city can be divided into two tribes. Two tribes can share a city. Reish Lakish Amar Ein Cholkin Ir Echad L'Shnei Shvatim. Okay, we started with the machloket Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. We're going to end with a different machloket. So we can. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Each city is owned. Reish Lakish says each city has to be owned by one tribe only, or settled by one tribe only. You can't have two tribes getting nachala of one city and saying, "Oh, you get this half, I get this half." Doesn't happen. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Of course, you can split it. So Rabbi Yochanan says, here's my proof. Look at our Mishnah. Ad shiyu medicheha, the medichim, the ones who sway everyone to worship idols, have to be me'otah ha'il u'me'oto shevet, from the same city and from the same tribe. Now, let's think about it, right? My love, it does not mean af agav de medichem me'oto ha'ir. Why does it say from the same tribe? Because what it's saying is, even if they're from the same city, they might not necessarily be from the same tribe. Why not? Because it must be two tribes can live in the same city, right? Right? So now, Shema Mina, from here you can infer that you can divide one city into two tribes. And that's why the Mishnah has to tell you, if they're from the same city, they also have to be from the same tribe. Otherwise, you wouldn't need that. You could just say same city and it would be obvious, same tribe. So Gemara says, lo, or Reish Lakish answers, no. You could theoretically inherit a piece of land, like a woman could inherit land, right? And then her husband kind of by him, right? He could be then an inhabitant of the city because his wife owns the land and he then is living there and he's from a different tribe. Or, right, you could be, so either she inherited or she could have gotten it as a gift, or anyone could get land as a gift. It doesn't have to be a woman, right? So you can end up with being from a different tribe in a different city, even though the city isn't given to this person in that tribe. Eitive, second difficulty. Arim Tesha me'et shnei shvatim ha'ela. Okay, they're talking about the Levite cities. The Levite cities were for Shimon and Yehudah. There were 9 altogether for these two tribes. My love, Arbo Palga Mehai, Arbo Palga Mehai. Rabbi Yochanan said, why did it say 9 for two tribes? It must be, there was no other way to divide it. It was 4.5 and 4.5. So they said the 9 altogether, right? 4.5 belong to this tribe, 4.5 belong to that tribe. And what do you see? Half, right? They shared one city. To which Rabbi Reish Lakish answers, no. Arba Mehai v'chamesh Mehai. No, it could be the 9 cities for the two tribes could be divided 4 and 5. Ihachi leprushe pirushe. Then it should have said 4 for this one and 5 for that one, Rabbi Yochanan says, right? Why would it put the two together if not that it was 4.5, 4.5? Proving Rabbi Yochanan's position. So the Gemara ends with Kashya, you're right. Rabbi Yochanan really makes sense, and Reish Lakish's position is actually different. So that really had nothing to do with our topic. It's just we use the Mishnah as a way to try to prove Rabbi Yochanan's position. Okay, so what did we do? We started with these 3 psukim about the future redemption, how many people are going to be wiped out, or how many people are going to end up in Gehenom. It's got to be very harsh or very lenient. From there, we got to these statements of Moshe, God, are you erech hapayim only for tzaddikim, and then we had the, also like, what'd you do to the Egyptians, and why are you making the Jewish people suffer in Egypt, and all the critique of Moshe. And from there, we got to, talking in general about Erech HaPayim. From there, we got to the God, what will he do to tzaddikim in the future? He'll be like a crown on their heads. What about the people not, right? They'll get punished and they'll end up in Gehenom. And then from there, we got to the Ir Nidachat, and we started discussing the laws of Ir Nidachat, because the Ir Nidachat don't have a portion in the world to come. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day. And I'll just remind you again, I can't remember if I said this in the beginning of class, but maybe I didn't. There'll be no class on Wednesday. Okay. Wednesday, we're going to do the Siyum Wednesday night. So there's no class on Wednesday morning. And Thursday, we start Masechet Makot. Have a good day, everyone.